Dear friends, I think it's time to open the morning discussion. I'm Sara Lenius, the director of Institut Suédois, an institution that has the mission to, in different ways, create an exchange between Sweden and France in the field of culture. I'm very happy that so many accepted our invitation to discuss under the title Soft Power in Hard Times. And what we want to discuss is the use, the position of culture in international diplomacy in times of shifting geopolitics. I'm very happy that I have the most distinguished panel with me. Eva Nguyen-Bin, the director of the French Institute, Institut Français, a very close collaborator to us that we're very happy with. Madeleine Sjöstedt, the director of the Swedish Institute, which is our head organization. We're a part of the Swedish Institute. And I think we started our partnership in connection with the State Visit in Sweden 2024, where you two signed a letter of intent to work to further intensify the collaboration in the field of culture. Martin Gedin, prize-winning journalist and writer that has published within exactly this question, how operates soft power in this time. And then I'm very happy also that we have an excellent moderator with us, Gallagher Fenwick, Franco-American journalist and senior within international affairs. So Gallagher, I'm going to hand over to you. And again, very welcome everyone. And it's a conversation, breakfast conversation. You're of course welcome to take part in the discussion.
Thank you so much. And good morning. Good morning. Thrilled to be here, obviously, and thank you so much to all of you for showing up. Just a quick word about the sort of spirit of this conversation. I think that it's a euphemism to say that we're going through an era of geopolitical upheaval and disinformation. And we're going to be hearing from this incredible panel about how culture has emerged as a very potent force. A potent force that can shape alliances, defend sovereignty, and redefine global influence. And the idea is to sort of explore how, on the other side of a divide, which separates to a certain extent democracies from autocracies, authoritarian regimes have clearly understood how to weaponize art, diplomacy, and narratives. Whereas I think to a certain extent, and we'll ask this of you, Martin, and your co-panelists, democracies, I feel, are losing ground. Perhaps because they underestimate the power of soft power. And I think one of the questions that I'm most interested in is how can Europe reclaim this battlefield of ideas, given all the constraints, budgets and perception and etc. that we're dealing with. So, if you'll allow me just a quick few words about my panelists, starting with you, Eva Nguyen-Bin. You're the director of the Institut Français, you're a French diplomat. You have been the president of the Institut Français since 2021. You were reappointed to this position in 2024, and 2024 is also the year when you were appointed ambassador for France's external cultural action. You've been ambassador to Cambodia. You also served as the director of the Institut Français in neighboring Vietnam. Obviously, you've had plenty of diplomatic postings in many different places. But just a quick word also under your authority, obviously, if you'll allow me, about the Institut Français, which is France's national organization for external cultural diplomacy. And it was created 15 years ago in 2011. And it's a key operator for both the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Ministry of Culture. And it's in charge of, correct me if I'm wrong, implementing France's strategy in cultural diplomacy. Thank you so much, Eva, for being here this morning. Madeleine, as was just mentioned, you're the director of the Swedish Institute. You're a Swedish public official with a long career in cultural diplomacy, international relations, and democratic development. And you have served in this position as Director General of the Swedish Institute since 2019. And obviously, you lead a large part of Sweden's work in cultural diplomacy, global communication for your country, Sweden. And just a quick word about the Swedish Institute, although I'm pretty sure that a lot of you here this morning are familiar with the Swedish Institute. I found this incredibly interesting that obviously it's a Swedish agency responsible for promoting interest, and I love this word, trust, in Sweden internationally. Its work focuses on public diplomacy, cultural and educational exchange, global development cooperation, and strengthening Sweden's image abroad. And it was founded in 1945, so very early on. Absolutely fascinating. And just a quick word about this building that we're in as well, because we are at the Institut Suédois, which is a unit within the public agency that you represent, Madeleine, the Swedish Institute. This is a 16th century building in the Mare, absolutely gorgeous. And I also learned that this place has about 140,000 visitors a year. So keep coming here. And lastly, Martin Gellin, you're actually the reason for which we're here today, so thank you for being so patient. You're a Swedish journalist, an award-winning author of 7 published titles on American politics, foreign affairs, and culture. And we're here to discuss your latest book, Rules of Attraction, Why Soft Power Matters in Hard Times. I don't know if this mic is working. I feel like it's kind of on and off switch. Otherwise, I can just stand up. Is this one better? Yes. Your book will be published in English in April of 2026, or are you going to have wrong information?
Fall of 26.
Okay, great. So for 2 decades, you worked as a news correspondent for Dagens Nyheter, a national newspaper in Sweden, and we can also read some of Martin's words in very prestigious English language outlets such as The Guardian, The Washington Post, Foreign Policy, Bloomberg, The New York Times, and many others. 2 of your recent books got the August Prize, which is Sweden's highest literary honor, and your work has been translated in 7 languages, French, Chinese as well, and you moved to Paris, good idea, a couple of years ago, 2024, with your family to cover international affairs for international media, and you are the president of the oldest international press club in Paris, the AAPA. How do you define soft power, Martin? What is soft power?
Thank you for that great introduction, and thank you so much to both of you for being here to talk about this. And yeah, it's great to be here in this building. I was actually had a residency here 5 years ago, and that's when we decided to move to Paris. It's a pretty charming neighborhood. But yeah, soft power is as defined by the American diplomat and political scientist Joseph Nye. He talks about hard power is economic and military. Soft power is cultural, values, education. He used to talk about Hollywood, Harvard, and Silicon Valley as the kind of pillars of American soft power. And I'm sure we can probably come up with a similar trio for French soft power and Swedish soft power. But it's basically everything a country does that is about persuasion rather than coercion. So charm rather than threats. So that's a kind of very brief introduction to the topic, and then I hope we can also talk about how other terms might be more useful today to understand what these countries are actually doing.
Madeleine, I hope this mic works if I'll just hand you my own Kind of a similar question, but with a slightly different twist. Tell us about what soft power, according to you, isn't. And what soft power isn't or is not. And Martin sort of gives a couple hints.
You asked me what soft power is not.
Exactly.
Yes, soft power is not to be forceful and to be dictatorial and undemocratic and so on. It's soft power is what we want to pursue in our countries. I mean, it's openness, it's transparency, it's it's how you that you are
Yeah, please go on. Sorry.
are governing your country under the laws and so on. So it's basically what we believe in as democracy.
Mhm.
That's the basis of soft power, actually. I don't dare to talk. No, thank you.
Freedom of expression.
Piggyback off of that, Eva. We just heard from Mark and Madeleine right now. Is there a little bit of room for nuance between how you would answer those questions with the answers you just heard right now?
Yes, please. Thank you very much. First of all, let me say hello to everyone and how happy I am to be here. Just an information that yes, the Institut Français was created as it is now in 2011, but it comes as a new avatar for an association that was created in 1922.
So you beat the Swedes.
Yes. And no, but it's just to say the long history of French cultural diplomacy that dates back from Louis XIV or even before, you know. So I just wanted to mention that. What I find interesting is to say that soft power is not only culture. Culture is a part of soft power. And for those of you who speak French, and I guess the majority in the room, I would like to mention that we have a hard time in French to find an equivalent to soft power. And that's why we often say soft power in English. So, some people say rayonnement. I'm talking about culture, right?
Yeah.
Some people say rayonnement, and I don't know the translation in English because I don't manage to find the right term, but rayonnement refers to the sun, you know, and Louis XIV was nicknamed the Sun King. So rayonnement is like an idea of the French culture as, you know, bringing light somehow.
Shining your light.
Shining, and bringing light to other countries and other people. That's why now many people do not like this word. So we have switched to another word that is influence, because soft power, what is soft power? Is winning hearts and minds, basically. That's what Martin and Madeleine said. Winning hearts and minds, and influence, and get new friends. But in France, some other people do not like that because it's kind of manipulation, right? So now we talk a lot about cultural diplomacy. But cultural diplomacy, right, but the artists, because we are about promoting French artists abroad and encouraging and supporting cooperation between artists. And if you say cultural diplomacy, then some artists feel that they are being used, you know, for political reasons. So it's not easy to find the right term. And if you talk to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, they will talk about cultural diplomacy, and that's now the expression that is mostly used. But if you talk to the Ministry of Culture, they will talk about, you know, the visibility of French artists abroad and the cooperation between artists. And it's not exactly the same angle.
Just very quickly, you mentioned that the fact that artists can be wary of participating in so-called, you know, cultural diplomacy. I think that one of the perils for democracies, and tell me if you experience this in your work, Eva, is this idea of trying to not engage in cultural imperialism. You know, being wary of, okay, we're not here to impose our culture, we're not here to demonstrate that our culture is superior to yours, How do you tackle this challenge? And am I right in sort of identifying it, or is it not really part of the conversation?
No, it's at the heart of the conversation, absolutely. And I think what is the Institut Français now, when it was created in 1922, it was really created to bring the culture of France to the other people in terms of superiority. Civilization. And there was a hierarchy of cultures. And now we have switched to a more horizontal way of looking at things. And what we would like to do is to engage in equal to equal partnerships.
Martin, I think that autocracies, Manu, you wanted to jump in?
I think it's very interesting to think about the differences between Institut Français and the Swedish Institute because of our history.
Yeah.
Because we were created before the end of World War II, and this was not to bring Swedish culture to the world, it was to becoming friends and building partnerships to other countries, because our reputation were not so splendid in the end of the war. There were reasons for us to show that we wanted to build partnerships. So it's really interesting to hear that our history is still so living very closely to what we are doing, at least on the Swedish Institute.
Which is why when I introduced you and I insisted on this notion that seems so central in the Swedish way of tackling soft power, which is this notion of trust. And I'll come back to it with you because, obviously your country recently had accession to NATO. And I think that the idea of neutrality was very much associated with Sweden. Sweden sort of, its image revolved around this idea of neutrality to a certain extent. So we'll talk about that. Martin, I wanted to ask you, it was very interesting listening to Eva just now talk about how democracies struggle with this idea of cultural imperialism and whatnot. I think autocracies don't have these kinds of issues. And I wanted to ask you if you can share with us, and I read about your fascinating book, which I recommend, it's going to be coming out in English, it's available in Swedish already, perhaps other languages soon to come as well, hopefully. Give us an example of how an autocracy, for instance, invests in culture, weaponizes culture, and uses it, as Eva was saying, for the sake of influence.
Thank you. That's one of the reasons I wanted to write this book, and why I hope that this topic is very urgent right now. Is Western democracies used to invest a lot in these efforts. Now the dictators are the ones who are investing the most. China is spending $15 billion a year on public diplomacy and agricultural diplomacy. Beijing just opened the biggest public library in the world, this spectacular building made by Norwegian architects, Snøhetta. You see this kind of gorgeous structures rising up in dictatorships made by Western architects, promoting a geopolitical strategy from dictators. Mostly we see this in the Gulf states. I was in Qatar, in Doha for the book, and visited a lot of these amazing new museums that they have built there. And I met a journalist who told me, this is, I understand why you came here to Doha, but the real story right now is in Saudi Arabia, where they're building 25 new art museums. And when I came home, I wanted to look up and make sure this number was correct, and I found that they're not building 25 museums, they're building 600 new museums. Under this huge project called Vision 2030 that Mohammed bin Salman is launching. And the budget for this is about 3 times as much as the entire Marshall Plan after the war. So it's likely to transform global culture and global power dynamics in culture as much as the Marshall Plan did, and as much as the post-war rebuilding efforts and investments did. And this comes with a very clear geopolitical strategy where they're also lobbying Brussels to limit climate regulation. They're using soft power for hard power purposes,
Yeah.
for sinister hard power purposes. There's a risk analyst at Goldman Sachs called Jared Cohen, and there's a bunch of articles and interviews with him where you can delve more into this. But he talks about this being the age of instrumental capital, and I think that's one of the kind of useful phrases for understanding the update of soft power. You know, instrumental capital, and that's using soft power to win hard power.
Can I just jump in really quickly? You said something that's really interesting to me. They're using soft power for the purposes of hard power. Do you think that soft power can ever be disassociated from hard power? Or are they always, including on the democratic side, inherently, systemically connected?
I mean, I think in this time of war and conflict and authoritarianism, I think it's very hard to convince the people of the country to care about soft power if you don't use the arguments of hard power. People want to know how they can be protected as citizens right now. But also, when I was doing research for this book, I traveled to a dozen different countries around the world, and one of the most sort of hopeful conversations I had were here in France, and in France there is a very kind of deeply ingrained understanding that culture has a value in itself, right? And one of the diplomats I talked to here, I talked about this, since the kind of neoliberal shifts in the 90s, there's been more demands on cultural diplomacy to show, you want to be able to measure the returns, returns on investment. What do we get for spending money on a place like this? Can we measure it in our GDP? And that's very hard to do, right? And most of the people I met in France say that the goal is the art itself, right? The art for its own sake is the kind of highest purpose of life, and I think that's beautiful. But I think also we need democratically, politically, to combine that with the arguments for the way that this strengthens national security, strengthens our survival as countries today.
Speaking of that, Eva, how do you do cultural diplomacy to counter authoritarian narratives while avoiding this perception of that you may be engaging in cultural imperialism, as we were suggesting just a few minutes ago?
I would like to sorry on what Martin said, because I think it is so true that in France somehow culture is in our DNA. And as I am a career diplomat, I saw it also while serving as ambassador to Cambodia and Vietnam, etc. That we always, and even when the president and Macron or his predecessors go to another country and sign agreements, there is always a segment that is on cultural cooperation. Always. And it is true that there is a part of us that is convinced, and now, before it was convinced to bring the light to others, but now it is convinced that it is an enrichment to get to know the culture of others, to interact with other people of different cultures. And this is not, the calculation of how soft power, translates into hard power. But there is a part of us also, and especially now that there is a budget crunch and a political, questioning, let's say, there is a part of the society that says, if you're not able to translate into hard power and to calculate how it translates, then what is the point of spending public money on this? And this is what Martin said, but I would like to highlight this because we are in the middle of this.
Yeah.
And coming back to your question, I think the big difference between us and some other regimes or authoritarian regimes or democracies that are turning towards authoritarian regimes is freedom of expression. I think the fact that we are able to express what we want is a tremendous treasure that we have to, be very well aware that it can disappear. And in the Institut Français, or in what we do as cultural diplomacy, this freedom of expression, meaning also the freedom of creation, meaning also the freedom of going to show your pieces of art anywhere, is at the heart of what we do. And when we think of culture, we often think of art, but there is also what we call debates of idea exchanges. And values, absolutely. So we also often organize what we call débat d'idées, which is also what we are having now, to gather in one room over several days, in several rooms, etc. People from different origins, be it, different geographical origins, or be it, different professional origins, not only artists, to discuss about the topic. It means also to allow people who are criticizing us to take the floor, which is kind of tricky as well.
Well, you have to limit that, right? Because you run the risk of disinformation, misinformation, manipulation.
Well, I mean, we do not exert censorship, but we have to have everybody, be able to express whatever they want in order to counter-express or to reply to that. But the fine line is also how much money can we spend on having, forums in which people can criticize France. At the same time, if we gather in one room people who all say the same, what is the point? But it's just, for example, I just would like to give one example. For example, we are now organizing a Ukrainian season in France, meaning a cultural festival on Ukrainian culture. We are organizing that with the Ukrainian Institute, and indeed so many French partners. And what is really striking is how, the Ukrainians said, we have to show our culture, because basically when the global war, broke out in Ukraine, no one knew about Ukrainian culture.
Correct.
No one knew even, where Ukraine was. And for them, to have their culture known is a question of protecting their security. Because it is easier to destroy a people no one knows about than destroying a people everybody knows who they are. And basically, when the war broke out, everybody thought that the Ukrainians were Russians.
Farther than what you're saying, it's not just about knowing who they are, but it's actually liking who they are. And that's why we go back to this expression of hearts and minds. I was, discussing this right before we came up to this room. Zelensky, as an actor, understood the power of emotion. And I remember the first speech he gave to the European Parliament. He was speaking in Ukrainian, and the person in charge of translating what the president of Ukraine was trying to say, convey to these European parliamentarians, and so us as Europeans started crying. And this segment went around the world, and it was his ability to make Europeans feel in their flesh the pain that Ukrainians were going through while being thousands of kilometers away. But just one thing, if you'll allow me, Eva, and I want all three of you to react to this. I wanted to beg to differ with the way you define freedom of expression, because I think that this is also the heart of the matter when we're talking about soft power. You said, we allow everyone to say whatever they want. I think that's not freedom of expression, and I think that that's a trap that democracies fall into sometimes. France took the decision to ban Russia Today, a Kremlin-operated outlet. And in my mind, that is not censorship. Fighting disinformation is not censorship. Censorship is when you prevent information from circulating. Fighting disinformation is democracy understanding that autocracies do not engage in a genuine and honest fight. It's like showing up for a boxing match and the other person has a knife. No matter how good you are at boxing, you will lose that fight. Okay? It's not about how fast you are, how agile, or how you move. they're not using the same tools. And I think that that's a trap that democracies have had a tendency to fall. And they say, no, we're about freedom, so everybody's fully free to say whatever they want. And no, that's not freedom. Freedom exists only because there are limitations and borders. If you take away those limitations and borders, you don't have freedom. You have anarchy, chaos.
There are limitations in the law.
Exactly.
There are limitations in the law.
And it's meant to be applied.
But I mean, the problem of democracies, the questioning of democracies is until where do you go?
Exactly.
Because when you start to touch about, you know, you have the right to say that, but you don't have the right to say that.
Yes.
That's the heart of the questioning of democracies nowadays.
Yes. Yeah. Maybe Madeleine, you have something to.
No, I agree with Eva is saying, because this is how you show what a democracy really is, that you are governed under the laws, and it's the law that is putting the limit of what you are saying. I mean, in Sweden we have had enormous problems with disinformation towards the social services, that we at the Swedish Institute has been mandated by the government to take responsibility for how we talk about Sweden together with the companies, regions and so on. And so we have been responsible for a very big work together, a workshop, let's call it, how we should talk about our country that should be fact-based, of course, and respond on the questions asked by all those people that we meet abroad. And this has been a very, very important work to do, because it has made us think about what is Sweden, how do other people perceive our country, and we are perceived that we are having very strong governance in Sweden. In France, it's a very strong culture, congratulations. And therefore we have to talk to the public in the same way, with respect and partnership and openness. And that's how we try to counter.
After years of Sweden selling, and I mean that in a positive way, neutrality as being one of your country's main qualities, how do you adapt your soft power narrative in order to protect, I think, a value which is central to your identity, and I was insisting on it, which is that Sweden can and should be trusted?
We can talk about this for a very long time. I think it was a very long time since Swedes ourselves consider ourselves to be neutral, definitely. And legally, I'm a lawyer, I don't think that we have been neutral for a very, very long time, seriously. But because we are a part of the Western Hemisphere, we are a democratic country, we feel that we are a part of Europe, and we feel that we are a part of the northern countries. So it was the Russian in full-scale invasion in Ukraine, which made this necessary. But for a long time we had been there mentally, actually, and I think that is how the surrounding world has perceived Sweden also for a long time. But as
the book is that young democracies may have something to teach the old democracies, and I don't think I think you already know this, but maybe the governments in Sweden and France need to be reminded of this. And this idea of reputational security that I return to in the book, which Ukraine is a great example of, where soft power is really not just about trade and tourism. It's about national security. It's, as you said, it's about making Ukraine admired so that they will get the help they need to survive.
Is that a model we can replicate?
I mean, I think for Sweden, definitely. France has a nuclear umbrella, so maybe slightly less concerning here, but the small countries, I definitely think it's urgent. And just a quick anecdote on that. The Baltic states, the East Asian countries, they tend to be very aware of this. That they are young democracies and they are fragile democracies and they're threatened by huge dictatorships. And I was just yesterday in Helsinki at a conference, and I met an Estonian guy who was the head of the port of Tallinn, which is now the biggest port in Europe, in Northern Europe. Tough guy, if you run Baltic port, you're a pretty tough guy. But he spends most of his days right now trying to convince the government to build an opera house, to build a performing arts center for ballet and opera and arts, beautiful choral music, and the reason for that is that they used to have massive cruise ships coming from America or with American tourists, and they used to have a lot of tourists coming from Finland, Sweden, and they've had less of that since the war in Ukraine escalated, and people are more afraid of going there. So they want to kind of create this beautiful art center as a way to be known around the world, become the kind of Sydney of the Baltics, and it will raise the cost of invading Estonia, and it will strengthen their ties to neighboring countries and to America and to continental Europe. And I think it was really beautiful to hear this from this tough port guy, and that tends to be the dynamic quite often when I talk about this topic. You have this kind of fake toughness right now from the right-wing populists who wants to be macho and talk about law and order and protecting their countries, but they're actually destroying a lot that builds democratic resilience and that builds national security. And then when you talk to the generals, when you talk to the guys who run the port in Estonia, they want more investments in culture and art. They understand the importance of soft power, diplomacy, aid work, as peacekeeping mechanisms and as peacekeeping measures.
No, brilliant example. I don't know if some of you saw these images coming out of Ukraine, which really gave me goosebumps, where this this troupe is conducting an opera that lights, they lose the electricity and the whole room rises, and they start singing the national anthem together to warm themselves up. And it is such a compelling and powerful image about resilience, about identity, and about, I'm going back to that word I used earlier, values. Eva, Magdalena, I have the same question for the two of you. And Mark just tackled this, which is, listen, we can't lie to ourselves. We're dealing with, means that are limited, money, finances, budgets. And so when you have folks who have access to those budgets and, we're contending with a geopolitically, dangerous time, and a choice has to be made. Bullets or ballet? How do you go about telling them, well, I understand that, but don't think that we should go zero in ballet and all in on bullets? How do you make that argument that, bullets are important, but ballet is as well? And are ballets as important as bullets?
And you can add health, education, justice.
Environment,
agriculture. Well, we are really in the. I think that's for us, that's the challenge of today, basically. It's not bullets or ballet, it's less money or, a little bit more money. And so I think we have to, this is what we are doing with my team at least, we have to better explain what we do and better show what is the impact of what we do. Because basically we've been living on this impression that everything was taken for granted, right? And so the fact is that it is not for granted. So because we work at the international level, we work elsewhere, because we work with the network of 100 Instituts Français around the world and more than 800 Alliances Françaises, right? So we are used to focus on the communication to the local publics, local audiences, which is normal, and we have to continue to do that. But there is now a shift that we also have to increase our communication in France on what is it that we do that French citizens, and I can say French taxpayers, cannot see, because we are working in other countries. So basically they don't know who we are, which is normal, and they don't know what we do. So we have to explain more, we have to engage more in public diplomacy here in France, and we have to develop tools to show what is the impact of what we do. So we were saying, and Martin was saying, it is very hard to explain, why is it important to support artists for cultural dialogue. I mean, I'm sorry.
Well, no, as a French taxpayer, I was going to ask you, and I was going to be incredibly, blunt, perhaps even rude. Why should my taxpayer money go to finance a ballet you're organizing in Libreville? What does that do for me as a French taxpayer? What's your answer?
Absolutely. So first, there is a question of the number of jobs that is linked to culture and arts in France. And basically in France we do not like to talk about money, right? So it is very recent that we link culture to jobs and, how do we say, money that is revenues, attractivity of the territories, etc., etc. But I have to say, the datas are not compiled yet. It's a whole new job that we have to do. Second, I have to say that it's a question also, and here I would like to introduce also that concept of nation branding. Yeah. It is a very Anglo-Saxon concept, right? But nation branding is basically how do you build the image of your country. And, to send a ballet in Congo will not build the image of France, but to have master classes, between the dancers of France and the dancers of Congo, and to have, exchanges, partnerships, to say, what is it that you would like from us, capacity building, etc., etc. Then you can engage in something that will shift the image of France, which is in former colonies in Africa, not very good. And this is what we would like to do, to shift that image that the former colonies of France in Africa have. And third point I would like to do, and come back to your values, basically when at the core of everything we are saying is a question of philosophy. What is the place of culture in our societies? Do we want a society with artists, with people who do culture, or not? The debate is on the table now. And when we talk about culture, what kind of culture? Do we talk about heritage? Do we talk about contemporary creation? And there is, a shift here. And another challenge that is ahead of us is, how important is to have international relations. When people say, I don't manage to eat or to have my children eat meat. I don't manage to, I don't have a teacher in front of my children at school, So what is the point of sending money abroad? So there is a whole, thing that is to be worked. For example, we have done a study on dance companies to see how important was the international part on their, business model. And many companies have 30% of the revenue that is done abroad. Meaning, if they don't have these shows abroad, then they cannot exist, and they are part of the territories. We have done the study, but strangely enough, it's the first time we do that. In 2024, we're working on the 2025 data. We have supported people with projects abroad in arts and culture, coming from 94 French departments. 94. There are 100 departments in there. 101. And including overseas department, meaning, that we work with people from everywhere and anywhere in France. And I think this is also important because, there is an anti-elite feeling growing, and, people may have the feeling that we always work with, the privileged artists, we always work with people coming from Paris, and it is so not true. And we also have to always explain that artists are not all super well off. You have the stars, but you have, people who have a hard time, making money. And so, basically, I am convinced that we need artists in our societies because we need arts and culture. We cannot always, talk about money, talk about, other things. But this is a very philosophical, conceptual, and at the end of the day, political topic.
We have about 15 minutes left before Sweden kicks us out of this lovely building. I want to make sure that, if some of you have questions, please just, raise your hand, give us your first name, and address your question for our panelists. And then I wanted to ask you, before, folks eventually ask some questions, if you wanted to add anything to what Eva just said in terms of how you go about, in this time where, some rising trends such as populism have a tendency, as I was rightly pointing out, to say that there's a complete disconnect between what the state does in terms of culture and exporting it and how it actually benefits, taxpayers back home in the country.
I don't think it's a very philosophical question. I think it's a practical question, actually. That those of us who are very engaged in culture and arts and so on, that we manage to describe this in the circumstances of the new world. I mean, if you talk about bullets, yes, but the bullets has to defend something. And this, of course, has to be our way of living, the way of freedom of expression, our democracy and so on. And the heart of all of this is the culture. And so we have to be strong and to be committed and to dare to take this conversation. Because sometimes I feel that we are a little bit of cowards in this field, actually, that we don't have to say this. And it has also to do with that we need a lot of innovations in our new world. Look at China. They are nowadays passing the United States as a soft power giant of the world, actually, because they are so innovative. And we have to be the same. And of course, culture it's also the heart of innovation, that you find new ways of thinking about things and so on. So we have to be very transparent, very fact-based, and very committed. And I think that is important.
China keeps coming up in this conversation. Let me ask you a question, Madeleine. I don't have an answer for this, but sometimes I think about this. One thing that strikes me about American imperialism, and Martin earlier referenced, the trilogy, Harvard, Hollywood, and the third one? Silicon Valley. Harvard, Hollywood, Silicon Valley has, perhaps as a corollary, this desire for you, thousands of kilometers away, to sort of lead your life the way they do, the way they want life to be lived. Do you think China has that same ambition? Do you think that the Chinese government wants to export a lifestyle the way Hollywood does or contributes to?
They want us to believe that, anyhow, I think so. I think so, but they, as long as they have the kind of ruling their country, this will not succeed, because we all knew that there has to be authentic what you communicate, because otherwise no one would believe in it. So it's we have to be very careful what is happening in China. I really think so. But it's hard for me to believe that they would compete with the United States concerning to get people to believe that this is a free country and you have open freedom of expression and so on.
I think maybe I didn't ask my question the right way. I think Hollywood contributes to exporting a cultural model. I don't think that the Chinese Communist Party has that same ambition. I don't think they're trying to export a cultural model. I think they're trying to export goods. I think they're trying to do so in order to grow their economy, and I think that it's connected to their desire to have influence, power, and perhaps monopolize it. But I don't think they have the same, I don't think we can describe their ambition, culturally speaking, in terms of soft power, the same way we can describe what's coming out of the States. And it's a question, and I see you nodding, and I'm here.
I think we're all.
No, go for it, please.
I think I was very wrong.
No, I mean, the longest chapter in the book is about China. I talked to probably 30 sources on this, including in China. And I mean, I kind of agree with you. Like they have tried to export a kind of idea of a lifestyle that they didn't really articulate what that would be. Something vague about Confucian values replacing Western values, but what they do very efficiently is create new narratives about what China is, this benign, kind of neutral force in the world, you know. And now, right now, they're talking a lot about, you know, I mean, Europe is dependent on China for the green transition, right, for renewable energy. And China calls itself an electrostate, like this futuristic nation that is a contrast with you know, Donald Trump's return to fossil fuels.
Carbon fascism.
Yeah, and it's a very attractive brand as a nation branding concept, and it's just necessary to know how you know, this is happening as China is building new coal plants. They're launching fast fashion companies that actually consume more, create more emissions than the entire aviation industry worldwide, including Shane and that just controversially came here to Paris, right? And they have, in 10 years, China has destroyed 10% of all African forests. You know, to build furniture companies and so on. And they're working with, in Nigeria, they're working with Boko Haram to get access to redwood forests. Which, so it's a very sinister.
Which they then export and which we buy.
Exactly, yeah. And it's you know, they're using the soft power of this like narrative of the benign state to create hard power, and it's destroying the planet.
Let's stay on China with you, Martin, because it is a big part of your book, and this allows me to segue into what perhaps is my last question to all three of you. What is the next frontier in terms of soft diplomacy? And one thing that I noticed, just looking online, is that I noticed that China has become very good at attracting, I think, new operators of soft power, which we, and I'm asking this from Eva and Madeleine, be underestimating, influencers who come to China and they do these videos where the place looks clean, looks rich, looks orderly, looks fun, looks happening, looks modern, looks forward-thinking. And then I look at the amount of views that gets, the traction it gets, the amplification, the commentary. And I mean, I'm not particularly interested, but that's my own self. When I look at the amount of engagement that video gets, I mean, I was talking about organizing a ballet in Gabon. I'm just getting an influencer to come who has 2 million followers, and boom. Is that one idea that you think should?
Yeah, they're doing that very efficiently. Last summer they had a campaign where American influencers were paid to go to China and create these videos on YouTube and TikTok and Instagram where they had amazing food, and they went on the high-speed trains and they described the amazing technology. It was all about kind of a great lifestyle, an exciting lifestyle, modern, innovative, green, futuristic. And the campaign was, the goal was to use 100 Western influencers to reach 100 million people. Mm-hmm. And they reached a lot more than that. Just with 2 influencers that I write about in the book, they reached 100 million people. So, and it looked like, it looked completely benign. If you're just scrolling Instagram, there's a tiny line that says sponsored by Visit Hong Kong, or Visit Shanghai or something, but it doesn't look like Chinese propaganda. So most people just absorb it, and in this time when everyone is terrified of America, it's a very attractive message, like, oh, this seems to be more benign, what's happening in China. So they are using that in a very sophisticated way, I think, the social media to replace America as a kind of aspirational country.
Eva, you were talking a little bit earlier about this sense of culture always being elite. Have you looked at influencers, or is it beneath the pay grade, and you're like, no, we don't deal with those folks,
Indeed, we have looked at influencers. We look at them every day, but it's really, it's very expensive to work with influencers. I mean, it's very expensive for us, and we don't have the means. So basically, we should try to see how we can win the hearts and minds of influencers, so that they work for us without asking such big checks. I think when you ask about the new frontiers, let me say maybe 3 challenges. One is AI.
Yeah.
One is AI. Indeed, we can talk about the social networks, but now I think the big thing is AI. It's a threat for the artists, for how they function, but it's a threat also for cultural diplomacy, in the sense that with AI you can create so many tools, so many things, so many people, fast and without spending so much money. So it is something that we have to learn to work with and to face. So that's one challenge. The second challenge is that cultural diplomacy or soft power, and cultural diplomacy being a part of soft power, is also a reflection on your whole society. How can you project a soft power that is attractive if the rest of the society is, let's say, questioning itself or in crisis? So, it's a global thing. You can project the image of an attractive country when the country is really attractive. And the third thing for us is to desinstitutionalize the way we work, in the sense that it's very easy to say and to publish on our social networks, yeah, we did this and it's great. But, people don't really care about what we say about what we do, because indeed we will always say that what we do is fantastic. So the thing is to find, people who will talk about what we do, because they see the value in what we do. In that sense, if we find influencers that say, I want to do a video on you because what you do is great, yeah, fantastic. But so we have to find ways of communication. People who will talk about us, for us, not, us talking about us. And that's a big challenge.
And the means of communication are there, actually. I mean, to reach 100 million people is not so hard. Sorry. We have an outreach at the Swedish Institute where we communicate in the name of Sweden, in English, Russian, and Arabic. I mean, we have an outreach of 100 million. So but we have to be more clever in what we are doing for them, because this is what the influencers are doing. They have a personal narrative of what they are describing, and you can feel that this is really authentic, which is not, of course, in any way. And so it's a big challenge for us how we communicate, and we have to be better. That's what we have.
Instead of we have to leave live. Just one question.
Thank you. Yes. My name is Tobias. I'm actually the publisher of the book, but I start to get back to what Madeleine said about authentic, and because I think that is one of the key conclusions in the book. And I can reveal that, Mark, you were a bit afraid of that this book would be viewed as an analysis or as a manifest even, as how to use artists and arts and culture for the sake of cultural diplomacy and soft power. But you managed that excellently, I think, in a way, and using a model of how to show that it's not about sort of control or manage artists. I think you should elaborate a bit on that.
Thank you. Thank you. I feel like we were brushing on that topic before, and how do we avoid the perception of cultural imperialism? How do artists avoid feeling instrumentalized by the state? And I think one way to do that is with artistic freedom, with freedom of expression, you're not going to get works of art that promote the country. Like you're going to get critical, dark works of art, but they can be used. They can also be a part of the soft power of the country. And the best example, I think, in the book is South Korea, and the way they have invested so heavily in an ecosystem that makes artists thrive, and then the best things rise, and then it gets exported around the world with the help of government subsidies and translation grants and all kinds of systems. But it's not self-promotional chauvinistic narratives. It's films like Parasite, authors like Han Kang that tell very, very dark stories about contemporary South Korea. But I talked to the Minister of Culture in South Korea, and he said, what we're promoting is not the works of art themselves, it's a higher truth about democracy and human rights. And they know that because, it's a young democracy, it's a fragile democracy, and they see that, for them to survive on the global stage, they need to spread the ideas of democracy and human rights. So that's a higher goal than the kind of metrics of the export value of each individual film or each individual book. It provides this higher truth, and that can only be through authentic messages, through self-critical, works of art. And that's also how a lot of Western countries worked during the Cold War in Europe. When they were smuggling books into Poland and East Germany, it wasn't books explaining the greatness of America. It was James Baldwin and Camus. It was often books that were very critical of the countries from which they came, but they established ideas of freedom of expression and democracy in these countries, and that's we have had methods that worked in the past, and we can repeat them. Now they're being used instead by dictators.
So there, I think that one question, okay, going to get that piece in. That's one question.
Rochelle Kelda, about the Anglo-American Press Association. I'd like your interpretation of a confluence of autocratic power and soft power as it regards the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., which may not be the same status as the Metropolitan, but indeed it's important. And soft power is a way of capturing hearts and minds, which is probably more important than political at some point, but they have to work together. All right, so Donald Trump put his name in front of John Kennedy and then closed the center completely. Clearly, it was a backlash of performers and audiences. How do you interpret this? What does this mean? What's going to happen next? I mean, Trump is being Trump, and then there's the reaction of the people. What's your interpretation?
Sure. Thank you. I think there's a couple of things going on there. One is, one of the first things that Trump did the first week that he was inaugurated was to increase his political control over cultural institutions. Before he started deporting innocent Latin Americans, he took over the cultural institutions, and that's something we see with right-wing and far-right populists everywhere. They understand the value of culture, and they're obsessed with controlling it and kind of taming the free expression that has threatened their worldview. And I think the nationalists have very successfully, as both of you were kind of discussing earlier, they have created this idea that cultural capital is the real villain rather than financial capital. Right? It's easy to demonize artists and people in Paris or New York or at the Kennedy Center, and then that kind of excuses their coalition between working class rural voters and business interests. Right? They both despise the art and the culture. So I think it's a very sinister, very cynical strategy that has been incredibly efficient. But it should also remind people who want the survival of democracy. Like we see Trump being obsessed with culture, mostly destroying culture, but that still kind of confirms the value of it, that how much it threatens his rule. And we see these dictators from China to Saudi Arabia and the Emirates, investing billions and billions, historic amounts in culture as a part of the geopolitical strategy. I think that should be like proof enough that this really matters and that it's really crucial for the future of geopolitical power balance. that should be the argument that we raise to our citizens and to our governments when we try to increase resources for this initiative.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you all.